Stories found between midnight and morning. Archive 018. The Grandmother in the Woods. Status: unresolved. Recovered: 9:14 a.m. Source: Clackamas County Sheriff's Office, Oregon Search and Rescue, Family Interviews, Medical Evaluation Records. Location: Mount Hood National Forest, Oregon. Every year, thousands of people become lost in America's national forests. Most are found within hours. Some survive for days against impossible odds. Others are never found at all. This case belongs to neither category, because when 6-year-old Emma Walker disappeared during a family camping trip near Mount Hood, everyone expected search and rescue to recover a frightened, exhausted child. Instead, they found a little girl who insisted she had never been alone. The Walker family had spent nearly every summer camping somewhere in Oregon. Emma's parents believed children should grow up outside whenever possible. Hiking trails, fishing streams, campfires under the stars. It had become a family tradition long before Emma was born. Labor Day weekend seemed like the perfect time for one last trip before school began. The campground sat deep within the Mount Hood National Forest, surrounded by towering Douglas firs that blocked much of the afternoon sun. The nearest paved road was several miles away, and cell service disappeared long before reaching the campground entrance. It was exactly the kind of place Emma loved. She spent the first afternoon collecting pine cones, pointing out birds to her father, and proudly showing everyone a handful of smooth stones she'd found beside a small creek. Other campers remembered seeing her laughing as she chased butterflies through the meadow near the campsites. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing suggested that, before sunset, hundreds of people would be searching those same woods. Dinner was nearly ready when Emma's mother realized she hadn't heard her daughter for several minutes. She assumed Emma had wandered to the neighboring campsite where another family had children close to her age. She hadn't. Her father checked the nearby restroom. Empty. He walked the short trail leading toward the creek. Nothing. By then, the casual concern every parent knows had begun changing into something else. The family spread out through the campground, calling Emma's name. No answer. They searched every campsite, every picnic shelter, every trailhead within sight. The campground host joined the search almost immediately, followed by several other campers. Within 20 minutes, nearly 30 people were looking. Someone finally made the call no parent ever wants to make. At 6:47 p.m., Clackamas County Dispatch received the report of a missing 6-year-old child. Deputies arrived within half an hour. Search and rescue was activated shortly afterward. The first assumption was simple. Children often become fascinated by something: a squirrel, a deer, an unusual flower, and wander farther than they realize before becoming disoriented. The hope was that Emma would be found sitting beside a trail, scared but unharmed. As darkness settled beneath the dense forest canopy, that hope began fading. Search dogs picked up Emma's scent near the edge of the campground. The trail led toward the forest. Then, it simply stopped. Handlers tried again from another location. The same result. The dogs circled, became confused, and refused to commit to a direction. Experienced handlers described it as unusual, not impossible, just unusual. More volunteers arrived through the evening. Flashlights appeared among the trees like distant stars. Emma's parents refused to leave the search line. They shouted until their voices became hoarse. Again and again, the forest answered with only wind moving through the pines. As midnight approached, temperatures dropped into the low 40s. Search coordinators quietly began calculating survival timelines. A 6-year-old child, alone, miles from help. The first night would be critical. No one slept. And somewhere beyond the reach of hundreds of flashlights, a little girl waited, just not by herself. By sunrise, the search had become one of the largest in the county that year. More than 100 volunteers joined trained search and rescue teams. Sheriff's deputies established a command post near the campground entrance, while maps covered folding tables beneath portable canopies. Every trail, creek bed, and logging road within several miles was divided into search grids. Helicopters circled overhead as ground teams moved shoulder to shoulder through thick undergrowth. The first 24 hours are often the most critical in cases involving missing children. Statistics were on everyone's mind, even if no one said them aloud. Emma's parents remained at the command post, answering the same questions repeatedly. What was she wearing? Did she know how to build a fire? Was she afraid of strangers? Did she have any medical conditions? Every answer painted the same picture. She was healthy, bright, curious, and only 6 years old. The forest surrounding Mount Hood is beautiful from a hiking trail. Away from those trails, it becomes something entirely different. Dense stands of fir and cedar block sunlight even in the middle of the day. Fallen trees create walls of tangled branches. Thick ferns conceal steep ravines only a few feet away. Sounds carry strangely, sometimes making voices seem much closer or much farther than they really are. Experienced searchers later described the terrain as deceptively difficult. Several teams became temporarily disoriented despite carrying GPS equipment. Search dogs continued finding fragments of Emma's scent. The trail always ended the same way, abruptly, as though she had simply ceased walking. Handlers tried different dogs, fresh starting points, different wind conditions. Nothing changed. One veteran handler reportedly remarked, "It's like she stepped into thin air." The comment never appeared in the official report. By the second night, temperatures dropped below 40 degrees. Rain moved through the mountains in scattered showers. Search coordinators quietly expanded the search radius, assuming Emma had continued walking after becoming lost. Volunteers searched abandoned cabins, culverts, hunting blinds, and old Forest Service roads. Nothing. Late that afternoon, one volunteer radioed that he could hear someone singing. It sounded like a woman. Soft, almost like a lullaby. The transmission immediately caught everyone's attention. Nearby teams converged on the location, expecting they had found another camper, or perhaps Emma herself. They found only trees. The volunteer insisted the singing had stopped just seconds before the others arrived. No footprints were discovered. The incident was dismissed as wind carrying sound from another campsite. No further mention was made during the evening briefing, except 2 additional volunteers privately admitted hearing something similar later that night. Neither filed an official statement. Meanwhile, Emma's mother remembered something she hadn't thought about since the search began. Emma had been exceptionally close to her grandmother, Margaret. When Margaret passed away the previous autumn after a brief illness, Emma struggled to understand why someone she loved so deeply simply wasn't there anymore. For months afterward, she asked when Grandma was coming home. Margaret had always sung to Emma before bedtime, the same lullaby. Every single night, Emma stayed at her house. Emma's mother mentioned it only because investigators asked whether there was anything unique that might comfort Emma if rescuers found her frightened. At the time, it seemed like an insignificant detail. No one connected it to the reports of singing in the forest. Not yet. By the morning of the fourth day, optimism had begun giving way to realism. Search coordinators prepared to widen the operation again. No one wanted to say what everyone was thinking. Children simply did not remain missing this long in wilderness like this and walk away unharmed. Still, the search continued. At 10:26 on the morning of the fourth day, Search Team Bravo was assigned one final sweep before the operation expanded into an entirely new sector of the forest. The team consisted of 4 volunteers and a Clackamas County deputy, following an old game trail that wound through dense stands of cedar and fir, nearly 11 miles from the Walker family's campsite. No one expected to find a 6-year-old child that far away. They were looking for evidence. A footprint, a piece of clothing, anything that might explain where Emma had gone. Instead, one volunteer stopped walking. At first, he thought he was looking at a backpack resting against a fallen log. Then the backpack moved. He raised his hand to stop the others. About 30 yards ahead sat a little girl in a pink jacket. She wasn't crying. She wasn't hiding. She simply sat quietly, with her hands folded in her lap, as though she had been expecting someone. The deputy approached slowly, identifying himself before kneeling several feet away. "Emma?" She looked up, smiled, and answered in a calm voice. "You finally found me." The deputy later admitted that her tone unsettled him more than anything else. She didn't sound frightened. She sounded patient, as though the search had merely taken longer than she expected. When asked if she was hurt, Emma shook her head. "No." "Are you hungry?" "No." "Cold?" She smiled again. "Grandma kept me warm." The deputy assumed she meant she had been thinking about her grandmother for comfort. It wasn't uncommon for children to say unusual things after traumatic events. He wrapped Emma in a blanket anyway and radioed the command post. The transmission became one of the most replayed recordings from the investigation. "Command, we've located the missing juvenile. Repeat, juvenile located. She's conscious, alert, and appears to be in remarkably good condition." The pause before his next sentence lasted nearly 5 seconds. "Medical evaluation requested, but I don't believe this child is suffering from exposure." Within minutes, the forest erupted with activity. Medical personnel hiked to the location, while helicopters were redirected overhead. Emma's parents were driven as close as vehicles could reach before running the remaining distance down the trail. The reunion was exactly what everyone expected. Her mother collapsed to her knees, holding Emma so tightly the little girl laughed. Her father cried openly. Even seasoned rescuers admitted they struggled to keep their composure. For several minutes, no one asked questions. Finding her alive was enough. It wasn't until paramedics began their examination that people noticed something strange. Emma's clothes were dirty but completely intact. She had no cuts, no bruises, no insect bites beyond a few mosquito marks. Her body temperature was normal. She showed no signs of dehydration. Most surprising of all, she wasn't especially hungry. Children lost in wilderness for 4 days are typically exhausted, frightened, dehydrated, and suffering from exposure. Emma appeared as though she had spent the weekend camping with experienced adults. One paramedic asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Sweetheart, how did you stay safe out here?" Emma answered without hesitation. "My grandma took care of me." The adults exchanged quiet glances. One deputy smiled gently. "Your grandma?" Emma nodded, She found me after I got lost. What did she do? We made a fire every night. Another pause. And she made soup. The paramedic assumed Emma was describing a dream. Children often blend imagination with reality after stressful events. He nodded politely and continued checking her vital signs. Emma frowned. You don't believe me? No, honey, I believe you. She looked directly at him. Grandma said people wouldn't believe me. Then, after a moment, she added the sentence that would appear in nearly every report connected to the case. She told me you'd find us today, because she said it was time for her to go home. Emma was transported to a hospital in Portland for a full medical evaluation. Doctors expected to find signs of dehydration, malnutrition, exhaustion, or exposure. Instead, every examination produced the same conclusion. Aside from a few scratches on her boots and dirt beneath her fingernails, Emma was remarkably healthy. She had lost only a small amount of weight. There was no evidence she had spent 4 nights alone in one of Oregon's largest national forests. Investigators waited until she had eaten, rested, and been reunited with her parents before beginning the first formal interview. A child psychologist sat nearby. The questions were kept simple. Can you tell us what happened after you got lost? Emma answered without hesitation. I couldn't find the campsite anymore. Were you scared? A little. What happened next? My grandma found me. Again, investigators assumed Emma was using her grandmother as a comforting memory. The psychologist encouraged her to continue. What did Grandma do? Emma smiled. She held my hand. Where did you sleep? Under the trees? Was it cold? No. Why not? Grandma made a fire. The investigators exchanged another glance. There had been no evidence of campfires anywhere within the search area. No burned wood, no ashes, nothing. Emma continued describing the 4 days with surprising detail. Each morning they would walk for a while. When she became tired, Grandma would carry her. At night they stopped beside large trees. Grandma always knew where to find dry wood. She somehow always had soup. Emma couldn't explain where it came from. It was already cooking. What kind of soup? The chicken one. Did Grandma have a pot? I don't know. What did she cook it on? Emma shrugged. It was just there. Children often struggle with timelines, but Emma's story never changed. The same answers, the same sequence of events. No hesitation, no contradictions. Then investigators asked the obvious question. Can you describe your grandmother? Emma looked confused. You know Grandma. We've never met her. Emma described Margaret Walker perfectly. Her gray sweater, her hiking boots, the silver necklace she wore almost every day. Even the tiny scar beside her left eyebrow from a bicycle accident decades earlier. Every detail matched family photographs. Nothing unusual there. Until the next question. What color was Grandma's jacket? Emma answered immediately. The blue one. Her mother, sitting quietly in the corner of the room, began crying. Margaret owned exactly one blue jacket. She had been buried wearing it. No one had ever told Emma that. In fact, Emma had not attended the funeral. Her parents believed she was too young. The room fell silent. Investigators moved on. They asked whether Grandma had said anything unusual during those 4 days. Emma nodded. She said Mommy was worried. What else? She said Grandpa wasn't really alone. Emma's grandfather had died 8 years earlier. Again, investigators assumed Emma had misunderstood something she'd overheard at home. Then Emma mentioned a conversation no one else should have known about. She told her mother, "Grandma said she's sorry she never got to finish my quilt with you." Her mother stared at her. Months before Margaret died, they had been sewing a handmade quilt for Emma. Only Margaret and her daughter knew it had remained unfinished. After Margaret's death, the unfinished quilt was quietly packed away in a cedar chest. Emma had never seen it, never knew about it. The child psychologist later noted that Emma showed no signs of inventing the story. She wasn't trying to convince anyone. She wasn't seeking attention. To Emma, there was nothing unusual about what had happened. She genuinely believed her grandmother had simply come into the woods to keep a promise. Over the following week, investigators returned to the forest with one objective: verify Emma's story. Children sometimes invent elaborate narratives after traumatic events. Memory can become distorted by fear, exhaustion, and suggestion. Search coordinators expected to find evidence that Emma had survived through instinct and extraordinary luck. Instead, every trip into the forest produced more questions. Using Emma's recollections, investigators attempted to retrace her movements. She remembered crossing a narrow creek. She remembered climbing over a fallen cedar. She remembered sleeping beneath what she called the tree with two trunks. Search teams eventually located every landmark she described. The locations matched. But that was where the evidence ended. There were no campsites, no blankets, no discarded food wrappers, no footprints preserved in the damp soil. Most puzzling of all, there were no fire pits. Emma insisted her grandmother built a fire every night. Yet investigators found no scorched earth, no charcoal, no burned branches, and no traces of smoke on nearby trees. It was as though the fires had never existed. One investigator suggested the child had combined several locations into one memory. Another proposed she had unknowingly wandered between old campsites. Neither explanation survived long. Emma continued describing details no one had asked her about. She spoke of a small clearing where deer came every evening. Searchers found the clearing exactly where she described it. She remembered a massive boulder shaped like a turtle. It was there. She described a spring bubbling from beneath exposed tree roots. The spring existed. Her directions were astonishingly accurate for a child who supposedly had no idea where she had been. Then came the conversation that unsettled the Walker family more than anything else. During another interview, Emma casually mentioned that Grandma had told stories while they walked. "What kind of stories?" the psychologist asked. "The ones from when Mommy was little." Emma smiled as she remembered them. Grandma said Mommy broke the kitchen window and blamed Uncle David. Emma's mother immediately looked at her brother. Neither had spoken of the incident in over 30 years. As children, they had sworn never to tell their parents what had really happened. Margaret had discovered the truth years later, but never mentioned it again. Emma had never heard the story. She continued, "And Mommy hid under Grandpa's truck because she didn't want to go to school." Another forgotten childhood memory. Again, something only Margaret could have known. Investigators considered whether Emma might have overheard old family conversations. Her parents insisted she had not. The stories grew increasingly personal. Margaret's favorite fishing spot, the nickname she secretly used for her husband, a recipe card hidden inside an old cookbook because she was afraid of losing it. Every detail proved correct. None of it explained how Emma could possibly know. The psychologist eventually reached an uncomfortable conclusion. Emma was not constructing a fantasy. Children creating imaginary experiences often embellish details over time. Emma did the opposite. Every interview was nearly identical to the last. The wording changed very little. The sequence of events never shifted. When adults questioned impossible parts of the story, she looked genuinely puzzled. Not because she had been caught in a lie, but because the adults seemed unable to understand something that was obvious to her. Toward the end of one interview, an investigator asked a question almost as an afterthought. "Emma, if your grandmother was with you the whole time, why didn't she walk you back to the campground?" Emma became quiet. She looked down at her hands for several seconds before answering. "She said she couldn't." "Why not?" "She said she could only go where I needed her." The room fell silent. No one asked another question for nearly a minute. For the first time since the search had begun, even the skeptics found themselves without an explanation.
The investigation officially ended 3 weeks after Emma's rescue. The conclusion was brief. No evidence of criminal activity. No indication another living person had been present in the search area. Child recovered alive. Case closed. Unofficially, however, several investigators continued asking questions. One deputy returned to the location where Emma had been found, carrying copies of old topographic maps dating back nearly 50 years. He wasn't looking for evidence anymore. He was looking for history. Emma had repeatedly mentioned spending her first night in what she called Grandma's little cabin. No cabin existed anywhere near the recovery site. Not anymore. But older Forest Service maps sometimes recorded structures that had long since disappeared. After several days of searching archived records, he found something unexpected. A small fire lookout cabin had once stood less than a mile from where Emma was discovered. It had never been staffed. It had been privately owned before the Forest Service acquired the land decades earlier. According to county records, the cabin burned to the ground during a lightning storm in 1989. Nothing remained except its stone chimney, which had eventually collapsed beneath years of snow and fallen timber. Curious, the deputy hiked to the former cabin site. He found only scattered stones buried beneath moss. There was no shelter, no foundation, no indication that anyone could have stayed there. Still, the location matched Emma's description almost perfectly. When shown photographs of the moss-covered ruins, Emma immediately smiled. "That's where Grandma made soup." The deputy gently explained that no cabin had stood there since before she was born. Emma simply shrugged. "It was there when we stayed." Investigators assumed she was confusing one place with another. Then another discovery complicated everything. While sorting through family photographs for the insurance company, Emma's mother uncovered an old camping album that had belonged to Margaret. Most of the photographs were decades old. Fishing trips, birthday picnics, family vacations. Near the back of the album was a faded picture taken sometime in the late 1980s. Margaret stood beside a small wooden cabin in the forest. The image had been taken only weeks before the structure burned. Emma had never seen the photograph. Her mother carried it to the hospital during one of Emma's follow-up appointments. Without saying anything, she placed the photograph on the table. Emma glanced at it for less than a second. "That's where we slept." Her mother felt the air leave her lungs. Emma pointed toward the doorway. "Grandma stood right there when she called me inside because it started raining." Then she laughed softly. "I wasn't supposed to splash in the puddles." There was something else, something no one noticed until the photograph was enlarged. Standing beside Margaret was a little girl. At first glance, investigators assumed it was one of Emma's older cousins. The family identified every child in the photograph. None matched. The girl's face was turned away from the camera. Her clothing was impossible to identify. What drew everyone's attention was her height. She appeared to be about 6 years old. No one could explain who she was. The original negative had long since been lost. Experts concluded the figure was likely another camper who had wandered into the frame. The explanation satisfied most people. Not everyone. Because Emma looked at the photograph for several minutes before quietly pointing to the small figure. "That's me." Her mother reminded her gently that the picture had been taken nearly 20 years before she was born. Emma looked puzzled. "No." She pointed toward Margaret. "That's when Grandma promised she'd always come find me if I got lost." No one in the room knew how to answer. For the second time during the investigation, silence became the only response. In the months that followed, life slowly returned to normal for the Walker family. News crews stopped calling. The search command post disappeared. The forest reclaimed the footprints left by hundreds of volunteers. Officially, Emma's survival was credited to resilience, favorable weather, and an extraordinary amount of luck. The sheriff's office filed the investigation among its resolved cases. For everyone else, it never really ended. Emma rarely spoke about those 4 days unless someone asked. When she did, her story remained exactly the same. Years passed. She grew older. The details never changed. She never added dramatic moments. She never altered the timeline. She simply described 4 days spent walking through the woods with her grandmother. When Emma turned 16, a local newspaper interviewed several people involved in the search for a retrospective article. One retired search and rescue volunteer declined to speculate about ghosts or miracles. He offered only one observation. "In 30 years, I've found children who were cold, terrified, dehydrated, confused, and barely hanging on." He paused before adding quietly, "I've never found one who looked like she'd just finished spending the weekend with someone who loved her." Emma's mother eventually finished the quilt she started with Margaret and never completed. The unfinished pieces remained exactly where they had left them until Emma was old enough to help sew the final rows herself. When the quilt was finished, they discovered something tucked between 2 folded sections of fabric. A handwritten note. The paper had yellowed with age. It had apparently slipped into the folds years earlier. The handwriting belonged to Margaret. It read only one sentence. "If my little girl is ever frightened, remind her she never walks alone." The note was undated. No one knew when it had been written. Emma asked if she could keep it. Her mother framed it instead. Today, the framed note hangs above Emma's fireplace. Visitors often assume it's simply a grandmother's loving message to her family. Emma has never corrected them. She knows who it was meant for. One final interview was conducted nearly 20 years after the incident. By then, Emma was an adult with children of her own. The interviewer asked the same question that investigators had asked decades earlier. "Do you believe your grandmother really found you?" Emma smiled before answering. "I don't have to believe it. I remember it." Then came the final question. If she was really there, why do you think she came? Emma looked toward the window for a long moment. When she finally answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The last time I saw Grandma before she died, I was afraid.
I asked her what would happen if I ever got lost. The interviewer waited. Emma smiled. She hugged me and said, "Then I'll come find you." Another long silence followed. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window. Emma spoke one final time. "Everyone thinks promises end when people die." She gently shook her head. "I don't think love works that way." The official record closes with a single sentence. No evidence was ever found that another person assisted Emma Walker during the 4 days she was missing in the Mount Hood National Forest. No shelters were discovered. No fires were located. No food source was identified. The case remains officially resolved. Unofficially, some of the volunteers who searched those woods still refuse to dismiss one detail. More than one of them remembers hearing a woman softly singing somewhere beyond the trees. A lullaby, always just out of sight, as if someone was comforting a frightened little girl until help arrived. End of record. Status: unresolved. Archive.